My name is Delcy Whitford. I am 28 years old. For most of my life, almost 20 years, my parents called me the slow one, while my sister Miranda collected Harvard degrees and promises of the family inheritance. At dinner tables, they joked about my dyslexia. They left me out of family decisions, and when it came to money, they paid me only a small portion of what they paid her. But on Miranda's graduation day at the Plaza Hotel, in front of more than 350 guests, a stranger placed an envelope into my hands that would uncover every lie my parents had ever told about me. What they didn't realize was that my grandmother had been quietly watching everything for years. She noticed every small cruelty, and before she died, she left me something that would turn the entire Whitford empire upside down. The Whitfords were old Manhattan money, the kind of family whose last name appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. My father, Gerald Whitford, ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate company my grandmother Eleanor had built, starting from a small Brooklyn office back in 1965. By 2024, the company was worth around $92 million. I was born with dyslexia. Doctors officially diagnosed it when I was 7 years old. Letters on a page would blur and shift, sliding around like they were floating in water. Simple sentences became confusing puzzles that took me 3 times longer to understand than they did for other kids. My parents' reaction wasn't help or patience. It was embarrassment. When I turned 12, they hired expensive tutors for Miranda. She had violin lessons at Juilliard, French immersion classes, and SAT preparation with a Princeton graduate who charged $400 an hour. When I asked if I could get help for my reading problems, my mother Priscilla simply sighed like I had asked for something unreasonable. Dulcie, "We've already spent so much on specialists," she said. "At some point we have to accept that some children just aren't academic." I was only 12. I believed her, so I taught myself how to adjust. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I started making visual notes with diagrams and flowcharts so I could understand information in ways normal reading never worked for me. And every Sunday afternoon, I took the subway to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side. She would sit with me for hours, explaining ideas through stories instead of textbooks. One afternoon, she placed her weathered hand over mine. "Dooley," she told me softly, "you read slower than most people. But you see things others miss. That's not a weakness. It's simply a different way of seeing." At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I would understand later. But first, I had to survive another 19 years of being treated like the embarrassing secret of the Whitford family. Christmas, 2018. 20 relatives gathered around the long mahogany dining table inside my parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Caterers moved quietly between chairs. It was the yearly performance of Whitford. Family perfection. My father stood at the head of the table and raised his wine glass. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, his voice carrying the same authority he used in boardrooms. "Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law School, full scholarship." The room exploded with applause. Cheers filled the dining room. Miranda blushed with careful modesty. "My oldest daughter," Gerald continued proudly, "will be the first Whitford to attend Harvard in 3 generations. She's going to take this family and this company to incredible heights." More applause. Uncle Richard slapped Miranda on the shoulder. Aunt Catherine wiped tears from her eyes with a napkin. Then my father's eyes moved slowly down the table to me and Dooley. He paused. The warmth vanished from his voice. "Well, Dooley is also here." A few relatives laughed softly. Awkward little chuckles, the kind people give when they don't know what else to do. Miranda didn't defend me. She laughed too. I stared down at my plate. The roasted lamb blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. Under the table, someone touched my hand. Thin fingers with soft, papery skin. Grandma Eleanor, sitting across from me, squeezed my hand gently. When I looked up, Her eyes held something fierce, something that looked like anger directed at her own son. She didn't say anything that night, but 3 months later she called me to her apartment and said she had something important to show me. I didn't realize it then, but that Christmas dinner, that casual moment of cruelty in front of 20 witnesses, had started something moving, something that would take 5 years to explode. After graduating from a state university in 2022, not an Ivy League school, never an Ivy, I applied for a job at Whitford Properties. I wanted to prove that I could contribute to the family business too. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant. Salary, $42,000 a year. That same month, Miranda joined the company as chief legal counsel. Her salary was $280,000 plus bonuses. My daily job involved photocopying documents, reserving conference rooms, and bringing coffee to executives who never even bothered to learn my name. I wasn't invited to meetings. I never saw contracts or strategy discussions, and I listened. During those long hours in the copy room, I discovered something about myself. I could see patterns other people missed. When executives talked about deals in the hallway, I drew diagrams connecting the people involved, the movement of money, and the possible conflicts. A skill I created to survive my reading problems had slowly turned into something else. Grandma Eleanor had helped shape that ability. On those Sunday afternoons, in her apartment, she used to spread old contracts across the table from the early days of the company. She didn't ask me to read every line. Instead, she showed me how to understand them like systems. Your father reads contracts like a lawyer, she told me once in 2019, shortly before her health began failing. He searches for what he can exploit. Then she tapped one of my diagrams. But you read them like an architect. You see how all the pieces connect. That same day, she gave me a small wooden box. Mahogany wood with brass hinges. Keep this safe, she told me. Don't open it yet. When the moment comes, you'll understand. I brought the box home and hid it in my closet, trying to forget the strange feeling behind her words. March 2019. Grandma Eleanor's apartment. She was 82 then. Her strong frame had grown thin and fragile, her silver hair light and wispy against the cushion of her armchair. But her eyes were still sharp. Sit down, Dooley, she said. I sat across from her in the living room where I had spent so many Sundays growing up. The walls were covered with photographs. Eleanor standing at the groundbreaking of her first Brooklyn property in 1965. Eleanor shaking hands with Mayor Koch. Eleanor accepting a Women in Business award in 1987. There wasn't a single photo of my father leading the company. I built Whitford Properties from nothing, she said quietly. One office, one secretary. 60 years of work. She paused. Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. He doesn't understand what it means to create something. She leaned forward. He judges people by degrees, credentials, and how impressive they sound in boardrooms. But I judge people by how they treat those who can't defend themselves. Her eyes locked onto mine. And you, Dulcie, are the only one in this family who understands kindness. She placed the wooden box into my hands. There's something inside that might help you one day, but not yet. You're not ready, and neither is Gerald. Her grip tightened slightly. When the moment comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to know what was inside, why she trusted me, what she meant. But she suddenly changed the subject. She started talking about the weather, her small garden, and the novel she was reading. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in the hospice room. I was the only family member sitting beside her bed when she passed. Away, the wooden box stayed hidden in my closet. Unopened, April 2024. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject, Position Restructuring, Confidential. Dear Ms. Whitford, As part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated effective July 1st, 2024. Human Resources will contact you regarding severance. I read the message 3 times. The letters moved and blurred before settling back into the same painful meaning. They were firing me that evening. I stayed late at the office, organizing files no one would ever open again. Through the thin wall between my cubicle and my father's corner office, I heard voices. Gerald and Priscilla. We can't have her here when Miranda takes over, my father said. It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary. People will start asking questions, my mother asked. Why she's not in leadership. Why we never promoted her. He paused. Why she's the way she is. My mother answered quietly. We've done everything we could for her, Gerald. Some children just don't have what it takes. Exactly, my father said. So she needs to go. We'll give her a decent severance. She can find something else. Something more appropriate for her abilities. I pressed my hand against the wall. $42,000 a year. My small studio apartment in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 a month. I had no savings, no safety net. If I lost this job, I would be homeless within 2 months. But the money wasn't what made my chest tighten. It was the realization slowly settling into my bones. If I let them do this, if I accepted their version of who I was, the social consequences spread out like waves. Friends of my parents suddenly remembered other plans. Invitations to charity events stopped coming. The Whitford name, once a key that opened every door on the Upper East Side, now came with a warning. I didn't celebrate their fall, but I didn't grieve it either. Margaret Coleman called me on Saturday morning. How are you holding up? She asked. I don't know yet, I admitted. Ask me in 6 months. Fair enough. There was a pause. Eleanor would have handled it the same way, confidence over punishment, giving him a chance he didn't deserve. She chuckled softly. She always said mercy was the ultimate power move. I thought about that long after we hung up. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was choice. And for the first time, the choice was mine. June 8th, 2024, 3 weeks after the board meeting, my phone rang at 2 p.m. It was Dulcie. My mother's voice sounded smaller than ever. Can we talk? Just us. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral ground. No risk of Gerald showing up with lawyers. Priscilla was already there when I arrived. She looked older, carefully applied makeup, couldn't hide the exhaustion underneath. Thank you for coming, she said, wrapping her hands around a cup she hadn't touched. I know I don't deserve it. What do you want, Mom? To apologize? The word came out shaky, carrying everything unsaid. For the way we treated you, for the things we said, for the things we didn't say. Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because everything changed? She flinched. The question hung between us like smoke. Both, she finally admitted. I'm ashamed, but both. Her eyes filled with tears. I was so focused on Miranda's success, on appearances. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet, but that was a lie. I told myself that so I wouldn't feel guilty. You let Dad call me worthless in front of family, in front of business partners. You never defended me, not once. I know. A tear slid down her cheek. I know, and I can never undo it. I don't know if that's even possible anymore, but I had to try. I looked at the woman who had been my mother for 28 years, who had braided my hair as a child and forgotten my birthday as an adult. I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen, I said slowly, but I'm willing to try building something new, something honest. She nodded, speechless. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. August 2024, 2 months later. Miranda called while I was walking through Central Park. I almost didn't pick up. Dooley, I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet? There's something I need to say. We sat on a bench near Bethesda Fountain. The August heat pressed down like a weight. Miranda looked different. The armor of perfection she had worn her whole life was cracking. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back carelessly. "I've been in therapy," she said without preamble. "Since May, 3 times a week." "That's good." "It's brutal," she laughed without humor. "Turns out being the golden child isn't really a gift. It's a different kind of cage." I waited. Dad expected me to be perfect. Every grade, every achievement, every award was never enough. It was just the baseline for what came next. She stared at the fountain, the way they treated you. I told myself it was just how things were, that you were different, that I was protecting you by not challenging them. You weren't protecting me. No, I was protecting myself. If I defended you, I became a target too. She finally met my eyes. "That's not an excuse. It's just the truth." "What do you want from me, Miranda?" "Nothing I don't deserve." "Anything," her voice cracked. "I just wanted you to know. I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." We sat in silence. 2 sisters who had grown up in the same house as strangers. "I can't go back to how things were," I said finally. "But I'm not interested in staying enemies either. Maybe we start over from scratch." Her eyes welled. "I'd like that." It wasn't the sister relationship I wanted as a child, but maybe it could become something real. November 2024, 6 months after the board meeting, I moved into my own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. 1 bedroom, pre-war building, with a view of the bridge my grandmother had walked across to her first office in 1965. The rent was more than I'd ever paid, but I could afford it now. My new salary as Director of Sustainable Development at Whitford Properties, $185,000 a year, plus dividends from my shares. The title was my idea, a new division focused on green building, sustainable real estate, environmental assessments. Kind of innovation my grandmother would have championed if she were alive. Gerald called once a month now, short, polite conversations. He asked about the weather, my apartment, my work. We both pretended the past hadn't happened. It was easier that way. Priscilla and I had lunch every other week. Slowly, awkwardly, she was learning to see me as a person, not a problem. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I had dreamed of, but it was honest, which was more than we ever had. Miranda and I met for coffee on weekends sometimes. We were learning each other for the first time. She told me about the pressure she had carried. I told her about the loneliness. Neither of us pretended the past was okay, but we were writing a new story. On my apartment wall, I hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for 40 years. Sometimes, when the evening light hit just right, I could almost see her smiling. "You did it, Grandma," I thought. "You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them." 6 months ago, I was invisible. Now I was fully myself. Looking back, I understand something now. I couldn't at 27. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was better than Miranda. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power corrupt me the way it had corrupted my father. Dyslexia isn't a flaw. It's part of who I am, like my visual memory, patience, and ability to see patterns others miss. The traits that made me slow in my parents' eyes were the same ones that helped me see the truth when everyone else looked away. Gerald judged worth by credentials, degrees, performance. Eleanor judged worth by character, kindness, by how people treated those who couldn't fight back. And now, I get to judge my own worth. Not by my parents, not by my sister, not by strangers online, but by my own standard, my own measure, my own truth. If you see yourself in my story, if you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, told you'd never be anything, I want you to know. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value. But you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking approval from people who will never give it. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They let you choose who enters your life and on what terms. My family hurt me for 28 years, but I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That's the real inheritance my grandmother left me, and nobody can ever take it away. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't set by those who failed to see it, I want to hear from you. Subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment telling your story. And if you want more stories like this, about ordinary people finding courage to stand up for themselves, check the link in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time. Margaret Coleman gently touched my shoulder as she walked past. Gerald and Miranda stood in the corner arguing in low voices that slowly became sharper and louder. Finally, Patterson returned and leaned close to Robert Hartley, whispering something in his ear. Hartley's expression changed, briefly from surprise to resignation. "Please take your seats." The board members returned to their chairs. The tension in the room had become hard and fragile. "Our legal counsel has confirmed the following," Hartley said while reading from his notes. "The will presented by Miss Whitford is valid under New York state law. It replaces all previous testament documents, effective immediately. Dulcie Whitford holds 51% of Whitford Properties shares." Someone inhaled sharply. Additionally, Hartley continued, "As majority shareholder, Miss Whitford has the right to present motions to the board, including matters related to executive leadership." He looked directly at me. "Miss Whitford, do you have any motions you wish to bring forward?" Asterisk, I stood up. My heart was racing, but my voice stayed steady. "I have one motion." Gerald got up from his seat. "Robert, this is sit down, Gerald." Hartley's voice held an unexpected firmness. "Miss Whitford has the floor." Gerald sat back down. His face looked pale. I looked around the table at 12 people who, just an hour ago, had never thought I could do anything important. Now they were waiting for my choice. I held the power to ruin my father's career. I thought about what my grandmother would have wanted, and I made my decision. I'm not suggesting we remove Gerald Whitford as CEO. The room shifted. Miranda's head snapped up. Even Margaret looked shocked. "What I am suggesting," I continued, "is a vote of confidence. The board will decide if Gerald Whitford still has their confidence as CEO of Whitford Properties. If the majority says no confidence, he resigns. If the majority says confidence, I will not interfere with his leadership during my time as majority shareholder." "This is ridiculous," Miranda said. "You're turning this into a show, a revenge story." "No," I met her eyes. "This is proper corporate governance. The same process every well-run company follows. The same process Grandma Eleanor put into our bylaws 40 years ago." I paused. "If Dad has the board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about." Robert Hartley studied me for a moment. A hint of respect appeared in his face. "Is there a second for this motion?" "Seconded." Margaret Coleman didn't hesitate. "Then we'll vote. All those showing confidence in Gerald Whitford as CEO, raise your hands." 4 hands went up. Gerald's supporters, people who owed their seats to his recommendations. All those showing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Twice. The motion passes 7-4 with 1 abstention. He turned to Gerald. "Mr. Whitford, the board has voted no confidence. According to Section 14.3 of our bylaws, you have 30 days to resign." Gerald didn't say a word. He stood and looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in my life, I expected rage, hate, threats. What I saw was worse. Recognition. The realization that he had misjudged me completely, and now lost everything. He walked out silently. I know what some of you are thinking. Why didn't she just fire him? Why give him a chance to keep his job? Because revenge isn't justice. Because destroying someone doesn't fix the past. And because my grandmother didn't raise me to be cruel. She raised me to be fair. If that makes sense to you, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications because the story isn't finished. Not at all. Now, after the boardroom cleared, Gerald caught me in the hallway outside. Priscilla was with him. Someone must have called her during the break. Her face was streaked with tears, mascara running down. You, Gerald's voice barely held. You, ungrateful, scheming Gerald. Priscilla put a hand on his arm. Not here. Not here. She just ruined our family in front of 12 people. I stood firm. I didn't ruin anything. I told the truth. The truth. Gerald laughed bitterly. Your grandmother was misled. That lawyer Ellis, he must have Grandma Eleanor wrote. That will 5 months after you tried to take her power. Because she saw who you really are. My voice stayed calm. You didn't lose because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her. Priscilla stepped forward. Dulcie, darling, you have to understand. We were trying to protect you. You've always struggled. We didn't want to pressure you. You didn't protect me. You erased me. 28 years of silence turned into words. Every Christmas, every family photo, every conversation where you praised Miranda and pretended I didn't exist. That wasn't protection. That was neglect. That's not fair. You're right. It wasn't fair. I looked at my mother. I spent my life trying to prove I belonged in this family. I'm done proving. The documents speak clearly. Gerald grabbed my arm. This isn't over. We'll challenge that will. I pulled away. You'll lose, you know it. Grandma Eleanor planned for every scenario, even this one. I walked to the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother call. Dulce, wait. I didn't. Wait. For the first time, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on my parents' faces. I leaned against the brushed steel wall, finally breathing. The adrenaline that had carried me through 2 hours started to fade, leaving something strange behind. Not triumph, not joy, grief. I had just ended 28 years of hoping things would change, of believing if I was patient, quiet, and good, my parents would see me, love me like they loved Miranda. That hope was gone. I ended it myself. The elevator went down 42 floors. By the time it reached the lobby, I had wiped my eyes and adjusted my borrowed blazer. Jonathan Ellis was waiting by security. That was, he searched for the right word. Important, necessary. Your grandmother would agree. He fell in step beside me as I walked out. What now? Now I go home, sleep, try to figure out what life looks like without the family I thought I had, and the company. I don't want to be CEO. I never did. We stopped at the revolving doors. I just want the company my grandmother built to be run by people who care, not people who see it as theirs to inherit. Ellis nodded. The board will want a meeting. Talk about transition and your role. I know, but not today. I stepped out, felt Manhattan sunlight on my face. Today, I only need to be Dulcie Whitford. Not a shareholder, not a victim, not a symbol. Tomorrow, I looked back at Whitford Tower, 42 floors of glass and steel with my family name. Tomorrow I start building something new. May 19th, 2024. Gerald Whitford signed his resignation at 4 p.m. I wasn't there. I learned through an email from Robert Hartley. Miss Whitford, your father has resigned effective June 15th, 2024. The board has named me interim CEO while we search for permanent leadership. Also, the board invites you as a formal strategic advisor. This role lets you take part in major decisions while you decide your long-term role. Please let me know your thoughts. Regards, Robert Hartley. I read it 3 times. Habit, then forwarded it to Jonathan Ellis. He replied in an hour. Fair offer, no hidden agenda. Congratulations, Dulce. That evening, an all-staff email went out at Whitford Properties. Effective June 15th, Gerald Whitford will step down as CEO. Robert Hartley will serve as interim CEO. The board welcomes Dulcie Whitford as strategic advisor as majority shareholder. We thank Gerald for his years of service and wish him well. My phone buzzed with messages. Colleagues I'd worked with for 2 years. People who never learned my name, wanted coffee, wanted to reconnect. I ignored most, but one stood out from Patricia Morales, an assistant since 1987, who worked with my grandmother. Dulcie Eleanor always talked about you. She said you noticed things others missed. I never understood until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She'd be proud. I saved it. Some recognition doesn't come from family. Sometimes that's better. A week later, the story went public. New York Business Journal, Whitford Properties, shakeup. Founder's granddaughter takes control after secret will found. The article didn't name me. Corporate privacy laws kept it hidden, but Manhattan real estate circles knew exactly who. In a dramatic turn, the heir to Whitford Properties was displaced by a previously unknown family member. Sources said the change was overdue and noted concerns about Gerald's management. Gerald and Priscilla canceled their appearance at the Metropolitan Museum Gala. Health reasons, said their publicist. 3 investment partners requested private meetings with me. Not my father, not the board, but me. 2 of them, after hour-long talks, confirmed they'd stay with Whitford Properties. We'd been concerned about Gerald's leadership for years. One said, "Your grandmother built something special. Good to see her vision protected." The boardroom was smaller than I had imagined. An oval table made of polished walnut, 12 leather chairs, portraits of past executives hanging on the walls. One of them was my grandmother, Eleanor. Her painted eyes seemed to watch the room from above the fireplace. 12 board members slowly took their seats. Gerald sat at the head of the table. Miranda sat on his right side. Not officially a board member yet, but clearly positioned as his future successor. I was directed to a chair at the far end of the table, the children's section of corporate power. In the corner of the room, Jonathan Ellis sat quietly with his briefcase. He looked at me and nodded once. Robert Hartley, the chairman of the board, a distinguished man in his mid-60s who had known my grandmother for decades, called the meeting to order. This emergency session has been requested by Margaret Coleman, Richard Holloway, and Susan Parker, he announced. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret stood up slowly. Thank you, Robert. I will keep my remarks brief. She gestured toward me. The matter I wish to discuss today concerns a document that has recently come to light. A document that directly affects the ownership structure of this company. She paused. I yield my time to Miss Dulcie Whitford. All eyes turned toward me. Miranda gave a small smirk. Gerald leaned back in his chair with a show of boredom. I slowly stood up. My hands were steadier than I thought they would be. Thank you, Mrs. Coleman, and thank you to the board for allowing me to speak. I opened my portfolio and looked around the table. What I am about to present may surprise some of you. I only ask that you listen to the evidence before making any decisions. Gerald sighed loudly, as if he was already tired of this. I ignored him and continued. Before I could say more, my father raised his hand. I'm sorry, Robert, but before we waste the board's valuable time, Gerald stood up and slowly buttoned his jacket. He moved in a calm, controlled way, as if he had already won. I think I should explain some background first. Gerald, Margaret began, but he spoke over her. Dulcie is my daughter. His voice carried that polite but patronizing warmth he used with difficult clients. I love her, but she is not qualified to address this board about business matters. She works in an administrative position. She has no legal education, no financial training, and no strategic experience. Miranda joined in smoothly, her voice full of fake sympathy. Dulcie also has dyslexia. Reading has always been difficult for her. We have tried to support her, but she lifted her shoulders lightly. Some limits cannot be solved with effort alone. Several board members shifted in their seats. What we are seeing here, Gerald continued, is a troubled young woman reacting emotionally, perhaps because of the announcement made at Miranda's graduation party. Sibling jealousy is very common. Mr. Whitford, Robert Hartley's voice cut through the room like a hammer. You will have your chance to respond later. Miss Whitford asked for this time, and she has the right to use it. Gerald slowly sat down again. The look on his face promised punishment later. Miranda caught my eye and silently mouthed the words, "You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at both of them, my father and my sister, and something inside me changed. It was not anger. It was something colder and clearer. They were not trying to protect me. They were not even trying to protect the company. They were trying to protect their version of the story, the one where I was nothing. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I removed a document from my portfolio. Today I will not be discussing my reading ability. I will be discussing this. I held up the will. The room fell completely silent. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford, founder of this company, notarized September 12, 2019. Gerald's face lost its color. That's impossible, he said. His voice sounded tight. My mother's will was completed in 2015. I have a copy. You have a copy of her earlier will, I said calmly. Under New York Estates Powers and Trusts law, a later valid will automatically cancels all previous testament documents. This will was executed for years after the one you possess. I placed the paper on the table. Mr. Ellis. I gestured toward Jonathan, who stood from his seat in the corner. Would you please confirm the authenticity of this document? Jonathan walked forward to the table. My name is Jonathan Ellis, partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Eleanor Whitford's personal attorney from 2008 until her death in 2021. I confirm that this will was executed in my presence on September 12, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and the original document is held in escrow at Chase Private Client. Robert Hartley carefully studied the document. His eyebrows slowly rose. This will transfers 51% of Whitford Properties shares. He looked up at me, to you. Miss Whitford. Soft murmurs spread around the table. That's a forgery, Miranda said quickly, but her voice no longer sounded confident. It is not, Jonathan replied immediately, and I strongly advise against making accusations of fraud without proof, Miss Whitford. Morrison & Blake's reputation speaks for itself. Gerald slammed his hand hard on the table. This is ridiculous. My mother was sick. She was being manipulated. Manipulated. I pulled out my phone. Maybe you would like to explain this. I pressed play. The audio recording from the 2018 board meeting filled the room. My father's voice echoed clearly. Eleanor is 81 years old. She does not understand modern business anymore. I moved to reduce her voting rights to 10%. Was heavy. That recording. Gerald's face had turned dark purple. That was a private board conversation, which Eleanor attended, I replied calmly. She recorded it, which was her legal right as a shareholder. Robert Hartley placed the will down slowly. His expression had changed from neutral to serious. Miss Whitford, please read the relevant passage aloud for the record. I nodded and took a deep breath. To my granddaughter, Dulcie Ann Whitford, I leave 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC. Along with all voting rights connected to those shares. I paused so the words could settle in the room. This gift is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulcie. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not because of lack of ability but because she lacked support. Miranda made a choking sound. Dulcie is not slow. Dulcie was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. I lifted my eyes and looked directly at my father. Gerald has confused credentials with character and degrees with worth. He tried to strip me of my voting rights because I could see through him. He pushed Dulcie aside because she reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to be. Gerald said nothing. I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. The will continues. Built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Dulce. Robert Hartley slowly removed his glasses. Jonathan, can you confirm that this document is legally binding? Yes, Jonathan replied. His 2015 will is replaced. As of this moment, Dulcie Whitford is the majority shareholder of Whitford Properties. Margaret Coleman smiled softly. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged looks. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This proves nothing, Miranda said, but her voice had become thin. Even if the will is valid, which we will contest, Dulcie has no business experience. She cannot run a company. I'm not asking to run the company. I looked at the entire board. I'm asking you to examine the facts. I pulled the 2018 board minutes from MY Portfolio. March 14, 2018. Gerald Whitford proposed Resolution 2018-7 to reduce Eleanor Whitford's voting shares from 51% to 10%. His stated reason was that the founder was no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. That statement was taken out of context. Gerald said quickly, the resolution failed by 2 votes. Eleanor's vote and Margaret Coleman's aye. Looked at Margaret. Does that correct? Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, Eleanor called me that night. She was heartbroken, not because of the resolution. She knew it would fail, but because her own son had tried to take everything she had built. This is ancient history, Gerald began. It is evidence, I interrupted. Evidence that my grandmother was not suffering from reduced capacity when she wrote the 2019 will. She was protecting herself from her own son, and she was protecting me. Robert Hartley looked around the table. Does anyone have documentation that contradicts what has been presented? Silence, Gerald. My father's jaw tightened. No words came. Miranda, my sister, stared down at the table. Her perfect, calm expression had completely broken. Richard Holloway finally spoke. Robert, I think we should take a recess and have legal counsel review these documents, agreed Hartley. Checked his watch. We will reconvene in 15 minutes. Jonathan, please remain available. The board members stood up. Quiet conversations began around the room. Gerald did not move. He sat still, staring at his mother's portrait on the wall. I wondered if he felt her watching. 15 minutes slowly turned into 40-5. The board's legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson, whom I had never met before, spent the entire time on his phone speaking with Morrison and Blake, Chase Private Client, and the New York State Court Records Office. Sat alone at the end of the long table. Jonathan Ellis brought me a glass of water. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to support you, if you know how it feels to be brushed aside or ignored, I want you to comment the word enough below. Let me know I am not the only one who has felt this way. And if you want to see what happened when I walked into that boardroom, keep watching, because this story is only beginning. Now let me continue the story. That night, back in my small and crowded Queens apartment, I finally opened the wooden box. My roommates were asleep in the other room. The only light came from the street lamp outside my window, throwing long orange lines across my bed, where I sat cross-legged with the mahogany box resting in my lap. The brass hinges made a soft creaking sound as I slowly lifted the lid. Inside there was a handwritten letter on Eleanor's personal stationery, a faded legal document stamped with the date 1965, and a USB drive that looked sleek and modern, clearly something that had been added many years later. I reached for the letter first. My dearest Dulcie, If you are reading this, then Jonathan has completed the task I asked him to do, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I am sorry that I could not protect you while I was still alive, but I can protect you now. The document inside this box is the original partnership agreement from 1965, the year I created Whitford Properties with two colleagues who have both passed away long ago. Your father has never seen this document. It clearly states that the founders' shares carry permanent voting rights. Those rights cannot be reduced, diluted, or transferred without approval from the board. The USB drive contains something else, something your father hoped I had forgotten. In 2018, Gerald proposed a resolution to reduce my voting power from 51% down to 10%. His public explanation was that I was too old to understand modern business practices. The real reason was simple. He wanted control of the company, and I was standing in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. I was one of those votes. I never forgot what he tried to do to me, and I never forgave him for the way he treated you in order to justify it. As if putting you down somehow proved that I was no longer capable of running the company. Use this information wisely, Dulcie. Do not use it for revenge. Use it for justice. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. My hands were shaking slightly as I finished. Reading the letter, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. A single file appeared on the screen. It was labeled Board Meeting Minutes, March 2018. It was a PDF file. Inside it was clear proof of my father's attempt to remove his own mother's authority in the company. Everything was documented with dates and timest. The next morning, May 16th at 9:01 a.m., Margaret Coleman answered my phone call on the second ring. Dulcie Whitford, she said. Her voice had the rough sound of someone who had smoked for many years and laughed even longer. I have been wondering when you would call. You know who I am? I asked. She paused for a moment. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, just before she passed away. I gripped my phone tighter in my hand. Then you know what I am about to do. I know what you are thinking about doing, Margaret said calmly. That is not exactly the same thing. Her tone shifted. It became sharper now, more like the voice of a business leader. You want to request an emergency board meeting that requires 3 board members to sign the petition. I am one of them. You will need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I asked. I can do better than that. I heard papers moving on her desk in the background. Gerald Whitford is not as popular as he believes he is. His management style is, let's say, very controlling. At least 4 members of the board have privately expressed concerns about him. They are simply waiting for someone brave enough to go first. A small spark of hope lit inside my chest. Who? I asked. Richard Holloway and Susan Park. Actually, Susan Parker. She corrected herself. Both of them have been on the receiving end of Gerald's temper during private board sessions. I will make some calls. There was another pause. Dulcie, Margaret said carefully, I need you to understand something. This will not be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They will say horrible things about you. They have been saying horrible things about me my whole life, I replied quietly. At least now I finally get to answer back. Margaret laughed. It was warm and genuine. Eleanor always said you had steel hidden underneath all that silence. I am starting to understand what she meant. She cleared her throat. I will prepare the petition tonight. Board meeting request, May 18th, 10 in the morning, Whitford Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Margaret. Do not thank me yet, she said. Thank me when you are sitting in that boardroom. On May 17th, Gerald discovered the emergency meeting notice at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I know this because Miranda called me about 45 minutes later. Her voice sounded tight with controlled anger. What did you do? I was sitting quietly in my cubicle at Whitford Properties, pretending to organize stacks of files. I don't know what you mean. Dad just received a notice from the board. Secretary. An emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Requested by Margaret Coleman and 2 other directors. There was a short pause. Margaret Coleman has not requested anything in 15 years. Miranda continued sharply. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about how the company is being managed, I replied. Don't play games. With me, Dulcie. Miranda's calm composure finally cracked. If you are trying to embarrass this family, if you are planning to create some kind of public scene, I am just doing my job, Miranda, I said quietly. Same as always. She hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, Gerald walked past my cubicle on his way to his office. He did not look at me. He did not even acknowledge that I existed. He simply slammed his office door so hard that the windows in the hallway shook. A few minutes later, I heard him speaking loudly on the phone through the wall. This is a ridiculous waste of time. Margaret is probably going senile. We will listen to her concerns, address them politely, and move on. A pause. No, I am not worried, Dulcie. My God, Miranda. She can barely read a spreadsheet. She is not a threat to anyone. I smiled quietly. To myself, for the first time in 28 years, being underestimated actually felt like an advantage. That evening, back in my apartment, I prepared carefully. I printed 3 copies of my grandmother's will. I downloaded the 2018 board meeting minutes onto my phone as a backup. I wrote a short statement for the meeting. It was not an emotional speech. It was simply a calm presentation of facts. Jonathan Ellis confirmed that he would attend the meeting. As the authenticating attorney at 11 that night, Margaret sent me a text message. Petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept that night. But for once it was not anxiety keeping me awake. It was anticipation. May 18th, 2024, 9:45 a.m., Whitford Tower. The elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor-2 ceiling. Glass windows, polished Italian marble floors, the kind of expensive corporate luxury that was meant to intimidate anyone who walked through the doors. I stepped out wearing a borrowed gray blazer from one of my roommates. It was 2 sizes too large. In my hand, I carried a leather portfolio that I had bought from a Goodwill store for $12. The security guard standing outside. The boardroom door raised his hand, named Dulcie Whitford. He checked his tablet screen and frowned. You are not listed as an authorized attendee. I am an employee of Whitford Properties, I said calmly, and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I cannot allow you inside. Is there a problem here? Miranda's voice came from behind me. I turned around. She looked perfect as always. A navy power suit, an expensive Hermes scarf, the uniform of someone who truly belonged in executive boardrooms. Dulcie, she said, smiling politely, though her eyes stayed cold. What are you doing here? I have information that needs to be presented to the board. Information, Miranda laughed. The sound was sharp and theatrical. About what exactly? You work in the copy room. The details of my presentation are confidential. You don't even know what ROI stands for. Return on investment. I answered calmly. It's not very complicated. Miranda's smile flickered slightly before she could reply. Our father appeared at the end of the hallway, walking toward us with 2 senior executives behind him. What is happening here? Gerald asked. Dulcie wants to attend the board meeting, Miranda explained. I was just telling her that it is not possible. Gerald looked at me the same way he always did, like I was an unwanted stain he could never quite remove. Dulcie, he said coldly, go back to your desk. This meeting does not concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom. It does. Margaret Coleman stepped into the doorway. She was 72 years old, with silver hair and the quiet confidence of someone who had been building business empires when Gerald was still a child. I invited her, Margaret said calmly. She has the right to address the board. Gerald's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he might try to block the doorway himself, but Margaret Coleman had been a board member for 32 years. Her authority in that room was stronger than his. "Fine," my father said finally, his voice cold like ice. "Let her speak. We will see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself." Then everything they had ever said about me would become the truth. I would spend the rest of my life as the family disappointment. Not because I had truly failed, but because I had never been given a fair chance to succeed. Miranda's graduation party was tomorrow, and I kept wondering what other announcements my father had planned. May 15th, 2024. The Plaza Hotel, Grand Ballroom. 350 guests filled the Golden Room. Business partners, investors, lawyers from famous law firms, and extended family members I hardly recognized. Crystal chandeliers spread rainbow light across silk tablecloths. A 12-piece orchestra played Gershwin softly in the corner. This was Gerald Whitford's kingdom, his stage, the place where he played the role of patriarch, business mogul, the man who seemed to have everything. I stood near the entrance, pulling nervously at the hem of my dress. Black, plain, $79 from Zara, the most I could afford on my salary. Everyone else sparkled in designer gowns and perfectly fitted tuxedos. My mother stopped me before I could find a seat. "Dulcie," Priscilla's eyes moved slowly from my drugstore makeup to my worn heels. Her lips tightened into a thin line. "You couldn't find something nicer. This is what I have." Well, she adjusted her Cartier bracelet. "You'll be at table 27, near the service entrance. Try not to draw attention to yourself, of course, and Dulcie." She leaned closer, her Chanel No. 5 perfume heavy in the air. "Tonight is Miranda's night. Whatever you're feeling, whatever resentment you think you deserve to have, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us." She walked away before I could answer. Table 27 was at the back of the ballroom, partly hidden behind a large pillar. My tablemates were distant cousins I had met maybe 2 times in my life. From where I sat, I could see the main stage, the huge portrait of Miranda wearing her Harvard graduation robes, and the banner that read, "Congratulations, Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law Class of 2024, and near the entrance, standing quietly by the door, was a silver-haired man in a gray suit. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't eating. He was simply watching. His eyes found mine across the crowded room. A strange chill ran down my spine. At 8:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped playing. The lights dimmed slowly. A bright spotlight appeared on the stage where my father stood, holding a champagne glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate an extraordinary young woman." The applause started before he even finished speaking. Miranda graduated in the top 5% of her Harvard Law class. She completed a clerkship with Justice Reynolds. And last month, she was placed on partner track at Sullivan and Cromwell in record time. Gerald's voice grew louder with pride. "But tonight," he continued, "I'm not only celebrating her achievements, I'm also announcing her future." Miranda walked onto the stage beside him, glowing in an emerald Valentino dress effective immediately, my father said. "Miranda Whitford will inherit my entire estate when I pass away." The crowd leaned forward. "This includes our family residence at 740 Park Avenue, currently valued at $13 million, a Tesla Model S Plaid, and most importantly," he paused for dramatic effect, "the position of CEO of Whitford Properties when I retire." The room exploded with excitement. People stood up clapping. Cameras flashed everywhere. Miranda gently wiped at her eyes with perfect grace. 350 people celebrating, and not one of them looked toward table 20-7. The cousin beside me, a woman I had last seen at a funeral 8 years earlier, leaned closer. "Dulcie, right so? What does that mean for you?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I possibly say? that I had just been officially erased from my own family, that the termination letter sitting in my email inbox earlier that day was only the beginning, that every fear I had ever carried about being worthless. The applause slowly faded. Miranda hugged our father while photographers kept taking pictures, and through the crowd, the man by the door began walking toward me. Slowly, carefully, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. He stopped beside my table, up close. I could see he was older than I first thought, early 60s, with deep eyes and the straight posture of someone who had spent many years inside courtrooms. "Miss Whitford, that's me." I sat up straighter. "Can I help you?" "My name is Jonathan Ellis." He removed a business card from his pocket, cream-colored embossed letters. "Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I was your grandmother's lawyer." My grandmother? The words hit me hard. "Eleanor passed away 3 years ago." "I'm aware," he said calmly. "She's left something for you with very clear instructions about when it should be delivered." From inside his jacket, he took out a cream envelope. Thick paper, sealed with red wax and a notary stamp. "What is this?" "Her will." Then his voice lowered slightly. "The real one." I stared at the envelope. The notary seal read Morrison and Blake, September 12, 2019. 5 months after that quiet Sunday afternoon in her apartment. 5 months after she had handed me the wooden box. "I don't understand." "Your grandmother gave me very specific instructions," Ellis said. "I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you." He glanced toward the stage where Gerald and Miranda were still smiling for photos. "I believe that just happened." My hands shook as I took the envelope. "Mr. Ellis, what's inside?" For the first time, a small warmth appeared in his eyes. "Mrs. Eleanor asked me to give you a message." He spoke slowly. "Give this to Dulcie on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready." He adjusted his tie. "I'll be available when you have questions. You have my card." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I couldn't breathe inside that ballroom anymore. I slipped through the service entrance and found an empty hallway near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights buzzed above me. The sounds of the party were now only a distant murmur. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside were 3 pages of thick legal text, a notarized signature. The same date, September 12, 2019. I read slowly, the words blurred. But I forced myself to focus. "I, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my final will and testament." My eyes stopped at a paragraph in the middle. "To my granddaughter, Dulcie Ann Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties, LLC, currently valued at approximately $1 million, together with all voting rights associated with those shares." I read it again and again. 51%. Diminished and denied opportunity, not because of lack of intelligence, but because she was never given proper support. Dulcie is not slow. Dulcie was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. A sob rose in my throat. Grandma had seen. She had seen everything. Then, another paragraph condition. To activate this bequest, Dulcie must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this period will render this will null and void, and all assets will transfer according to my 2015 testament. 72 hours. The deadline would arrive at 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. I leaned against the cold wall, the document pressed tightly against my chest. My grandmother had given me a weapon. Now, I had to decide if I was brave enough to use it. Jonathan Ellis was standing near the coat check when I returned. The 72-hour clause. My voice shook. Why would she include that? Your grandmother understood you, Miss Whitford. He handed me another card. This one had a personal cell number written on the back. She knew that if you had unlimited time, you might talk yourself out of acting. The deadline isn't a punishment. He paused. It's permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to suddenly change their minds about you. Permission to claim what already belongs to you. He checked his watch. The deadline is 8:30 p.m., May 18th. 3 days. If you choose to move forward, you'll need to submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can help you prepare it. Through the ballroom doors, I could still see my father posing proudly with Miranda. My mother walked between guests, smiling and accepting congratulations as if she had earned them herself. If I did this, if I used the will, I would destroy every relationship I still had. My parents would never forgive me. Miranda would see it as betrayal. But if I stayed silent, I would accept their judgment. I would become exactly what they had always called me. The failure, the slow daughter, the one who didn't matter, Miss Whitford. Ellis's voice interrupted my thoughts. Your grandmother believed in you. She spent the last 3 years of her life preparing for this moment. He looked directly at me. The real question is, do you believe in yourself? I looked down. At the will in my hands, at the elegant signature of the woman who had held my hand under Christmas tables and taught me how to read contracts like they were blueprints. I'll call you tomorrow, I said quietly. We're requesting that board meeting. Ellis allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. She said you would. I'm going to pause here for just a moment.
If you like a video, do not forget to hit the subscribe button for more videos.